But I feel very connected to this guy. I feel this guy was literally, I mean, he was the Leonardo of America of our times, and he's completely out of our memory. And
why is that?
Well,
did he believe certain things that weren't cool? I mean, was he a racist?
if you can imagine,
No, I imagine
no,
it's
he
the
actually wasn't. In
opposite.
fact, there's this beautiful thing where he was, Collier's magazine contracted him to paint the 10 most beautiful children in America.
Really?
And he went all over the country and found 10 kids and got to know the families, and it's like this whole story, and it's all like in the mid-30s in Collier's. And at the end of it, he said that he has no interest in painting any more perfect specimens. He wants to go to find 80-year-old ladies in the mountains of, Asia.
Get reality.
And, paint the faces of real experience and stuff.
Yeah.
No, he was lit up. This guy was bringing, and I bet he was the one who converted Carnegie, because Carnegie was in with Vanderbilt and all those guys. And Carnegie,
They were known as robber barons.
they
though.
were the robber barons.
Yeah.
I mean, they were making all this money off the Civil War and all this shit.
Yeah.
And then Andrew Carnegie had a change, and I'm pretty certain it's because he encountered Walter and
Russell.
joined the Twilight Club. And so
Better
Walter
than the
was
Zone, I
best
guess.
friends with Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Walter is the only person I know of that achieved world-class fame in all 6 mediums of art. I challenge anybody. Who else, just on the merits of their art itself, literally became the best in the world, acknowledged by their peers in all 6 mediums? So Walter, best friends with Teddy Roosevelt, and became a world-class equestrian, taking care of Teddy's horses. Teddy loved, they had this thing about horses together. And then he becomes the White House sculptor for FDR. He sculpted a bust of FDR in under 2 hours. It's this tall, and it's made of limestone. He sculpted green limestone, like automatic, like you make one error and the whole thing's ruined. I mean, sculptors will not sculpt in limestone because you can't fix, you make a little thing and you can't fix it.
So he just did it once, huh?
He just, and done, one and done. The guy was just on it, on it. He was a world-class figure skater and equestrian. He invented parkways. The Bronx River Parkway was his thing. He was an architectural genius. He built a bunch of different really innovative buildings.
Did he ever express why he was able to do that?
Yeah, it's all in the books. It's all, I mean...
Like he tuned into like a universal wisdom?
He went through 7 gates, and then he had a full awakening in the 50th year. And the 7th awakening was a full awakening. And he just tapped directly into the universe, and he just...
Did he have a teacher himself, or was he just doing it on his own?
No, and he was unbelievably prolific. I was in his museum in Waynesboro, Virginia.
Yeah.
And there's a book called the Universal One that's like that thick with gold embossed, and it's got some of his drawings in there. This guy was drawing, very large posters of dozens of interlocking spheres and curves, all freehand. I mean, stuff you couldn't do. I mean, it'd be really hard to do it with like equipment. This guy's like literally drawing hundreds and hundreds of these drawings. He channeled the periodic table.
Really?
There's 2 versions of it. And he had elements on the periodic table that weren't discovered yet. That got discovered later.
Was he what would you call it, an embodied channel? I mean, he didn't like talk about his channel having a name other than himself?
God.
Just God, right? Direct connection.
Direct
Like the
connection
Akashic record
to God.
access.
Yeah, and if you read The Man Who Tapped the Secrets of the Universe,
Yeah.
he talks about the great art geniuses and how their lives were. I mean, I'm just blown away. Walter was best friends with like all these luminaries. One of them was Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie Hall, he built Carnegie Hall to make Walter a studio. Walter created in Carnegie Hall. That was his place, was inside Carnegie Hall. It turns out that in 1870, this English guy named Herbert Spencer gave up on trying to convince the English that piracy wasn't a good strategy for global civilization. And so he started coming to the US, and he became friends with Thoreau and Emerson,
Yeah,
and
the Twilight Club,
all these
New York
different
City.
people. And they started
Emerson,
to convene
Mark Twain.
the Twilight
Carnegie.
Club. And after about 20 years, they had kind of a critical mass of interested people. And they asked the question, well, who are the wisest people in the society? And everybody said, oh, it's the poets.
Walt Whitman.
And so Mark Twain and Walt Whitman and Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson came up with the Poets' Code in 1895.
We pause here a moment in Jan's exciting exchange about the Twilight Club to read the Poets' Code of Ethics that had been developed back in the 19th century, the late 19th century. Originally, there were 7 items. Later, number 5 was inserted by Thomas Watson, who had been president, and numbers 9 and 10 were added by Walter Russell and his wife Lau later, when she came into it. So, Poets' Code of Ethics of the Twilight Club. Number 1, to attain the brotherhood of man idea by giving righteous action and goodwill service to every man instead of taking from him that which he has. 2, to discover that all men are extensions of each other, that man is made for man, and that the hurt of one man is the hurt of all men. 3, to develop character, intelligence, and good citizenship by teaching every man from early youth how to be a good neighbor and a loyal citizen. 4, to discover one's inner self by awakening within him that spark of divine genius which lies dormant in every man. 5, to teach man to think rather than to remember and repeat. 6, to realize that work done for the material world should be for man's ennoblement and not for grinding a soul out in the gears of industrial machines. 7, to know that man is mind, not body, that he is immortal spirit, not mortal flesh, that he is good, not bad. 8, to judge the righteousness and religion of any man by what he does to his fellow man, and not by his beliefs, doctrines, creeds, or dogmas. And these next 2 were added by Walter Russell and Lau. Number 9, to give a scientific course of study for comprehension of the Spencer Code of Human Relations as being the inviolate law of God, which man knows he must obey or else pay the price in personal unhappiness and international wars. And 10, to teach the scientific meaning of, seek ye the kingdom of heaven within you. I and my Father are one. God is light. God is love. What I am, you also are. And what I do, you can also do. Now that is the code that was a result of many meetings at twilight in various houses in New York, hence the name, the Twilight Club.
Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn came from the Twilight Club. These guys got together, they wrote the code.
Twain?
Mark Twain was in the group.
Club. Yeah, he's right there.
They came up with this
Oh, I
7
see.
stanzas of the Poets' Code, and then they all agreed to write shit. So Emerson's essays and Thoreau's, all their, Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, all came from decades of conversation, coming up with the Poets' Code, and then embedding the code in their writing.
Yes.
And that was their idea to transform human consciousness.
To teach man to think rather than to remember and repeat.
So when T.J. Watson became the president in 1900, he added number 5 and made it 8. Teach people to think, not remember and repeat. And and then they started embedding it in everything. And you read this story, and you literally, this is the story of modern society. This is the story of how this group of people decided to up-level the behavior and consciousness of everybody.
Wow.
And to transform industry, transform the society at every level. You can imagine all these, they're old guys by then, right? I mean, these are all captains of industry, gentlemen in their mansions with their drinks and the drinking jacket, I mean, the whole 9 yards. And this woman, 19 years old, comes to their meetings. When she's 19, her name is Sophie Irene Loeb. She was born in the ghetto, in the sweatshop area. And when she was 15, she like looked downtown, which used to be like across fields and everything, and she said, I don't belong here, I belong there. And she literally just walked down to Park Avenue and became a resident. And at 19, she went to this newspaper and she walked in and she was just going to talk to anybody, and she could just see everybody was busy turning out the paper. So there's like nobody to talk to. So she goes, well, I want to speak to the editor, whose name was Pulitzer. So Pulitzer is in his office, having just had his portrait painted by, I think, Carl Sandburg, very famous American portrait painter, and they had just finished. And so he said, sure, show her in. So she comes in and he goes, what can I do for you, young lady? And she goes, well, it's not what you can do for me, it's what I can do for you. And he said, oh, really, what can you do for me? And she said, I can write for you. And he goes, oh, really, well, what kinds of things would you write? And she hands him like this whole stack of columns, and he starts reading it to the painter. They're blown away. He hires her on the spot, gives her a desk. So at 19 years old, this young woman has a real job, and her job is to write about how the Poets' Code is not happening.
Oh boy.
And she ends up leading a campaign to illegalize sweatshops, put in the minimum wage, put in compulsory education, put in a foster system for orphan kids, put in the child welfare funds. And at the end of her life, she decided every child in America should have a playground, so she's to start building playgrounds. So she's just like this.
Wow.
And these guys were just like supporting this young woman, and like she'd go and have her ideas, and then they'd make phone calls and do whatever and just open the doors, and they literally reinvented society. Rotary clubs, Kiwanis clubs, the Boy Scouts of America, the Boy Scouts of England. Herbert Spencer met Teddy Roosevelt at the Twilight Club, where he gave a talk, and went back and convinced Lord Baden-Powell to start the Boy Scouts. And then they imported the Boy Scouts into the United States. And the Boy Scouts and the YMCA, both out of England, are pretty incredible stewardship, global stewardship entities. The Twilight Club ended as the layman's movement started. So I've just learned that IBM was created by T.J. Watson and Walter Russell as the leaders of the Twilight Club from 1900 on to literally transform business on the planet and to create a company that was an exemplar of value creation and respecting people rather than piracy and thievery, basically.
Wow.
This is what T.J. Watson, why he bought it. They figured out they needed to go in and build a company that everyone else would have to basically rise to. The book Think is written by Walter Russell. Think, that theme of that's Think, that's Walter Russell.
Yeah, that was their.
And that's the Twilight Club in business.
That was
Think.
That was their
brand. I mean,
brand for IBM. Think.
Yeah,
right?
it's still the internal magazine for their clients is called Think. I don't know. There's something for me in knowing that this spiritual adept, probably certainly one of the greatest, not the greatest artist and spiritual person in history, was with FDR in the White House during all of World War II. He was the resident sculptor in the White House. So he did a bust of FDR before Pearl Harbor. And then the bust after Pearl Harbor, they couldn't get the marble because it was being used for the war. Everything was being used for the war. That's why he did it in limestone, because that was all he could
That's
get.
what's available, yeah.
That was what was available.
Wow.
And the story is that he told a few people, you know, basically not to be repeated, is that he was one of the only people in the White House who could just walk in to the president's room. I mean, you know, most, except for family.
So he was close with the president, huh?
Well, I don't know. It's just so moving to me to know that FDR had this guy, and he was Teddy's. He had the connection of Teddy's best friend was FDR's mentor. I mean, that's that's insane. I mean, when you think about what it took for FDR to do that, and that he had this guy at his back the whole time, it makes sense to me. How did he do it? Because FDR was an invalid in a lot of discomfort, and as the war went on, his physical pain was getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
And he basically was being debilitated, and he made it through getting the war over and getting through the Democratic Convention.
Yeah.
And then Glenn Clark publishes this book, and it's popular and people read it, and an orphan from London who grew up on the docks of London, an orphan named Lao, L-A-O, reads the book, goes and finds Walter. She's like this gorgeous, young, like 300 IQ young woman. And she read the book and she went and found him, and she said, "You're mine. We're doing this together." And she just and so the reason all this stuff is here is because the Twilight Club, she was the one who got the foundation going and then founded the university and all the publishing stuff. Walter drove all over the United States looking for their home, and they ended up buying a 40-room marble castle in Waynesboro, Virginia called Shenandoah, and hosting the luminaries of the time at this incredible hilltop castle that some robber baron had built as a summer place, you know. Thomas Edison, I think it was his friend. He knew Edison and Tesla, and he was going to do a bust of Edison. And the sculptor that was Edison wanted him to manage the project, but have a sculptor do it. And the sculptor couldn't come. So Walter just went into state and just created the bust. And he became a sculptor at 55, and no training, just tuned into
the energy and
just did it.
It
is literally 150 years of small groups of people intentionally raising the consciousness of the whole planet.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it, and it's now 150 years of history. This is the last living member of the Twilight Club.
To you to continue the Twilight Club with the future, into the future.
What is this word?
To continue the Twilight Club into the future.
I pass this token.
Torch.
Torch. Onto you to
he's
continue
quoting
the
Bertrand
Twilight
Russell.
Club into the future with eternal things.
The last living member of the Twilight Club. The
We're
Twilight
it.
Club
Is the
it's
self-realized
happening
being.
already everywhere.
You are one of us.